then he describes the two aspects. Then he chooses the two aspects of himself to talk about. He tells them, I have the flame of fire in it, the eyes with the flames of fire. He uses that image to show them, to talk to them. If you were with us a couple of weeks ago, you understand, but for those of you who are just catching up to us, we talked about the different images that God uses, the significance of these images. The eyes of fire, the eyes of passion, the eyes of that burned truth, the eyes that have all-knowing, all-seeing, all-consuming truth. I said it's eyes that stare deep into you and they burn away everything in there. He sees it all. There's nothing that is hidden. This is from the Son of God who knows everything in your life, in your deeds, all the good stuff, all the bad stuff. Nothing is hidden from these eyes. And then he says, and his feet are like burnished bronze. Like bronze feet of a conqueror. It's back in the day, back in the time when the kings would overturn kings. They say they conquered their land, they conquered their kings. The other king would take their foot and put it on the king's neck, saying, I have conquered you, I have overcome you. I have victory over you. You're now mine. The feet of an all-powerful creator. Burnished bronze, because bronze was the hardest metal they had back in those days.
And can I throw this in?
Go for it.
As you had said, this was a community where things were made and sent out. They would have appreciated the amount of labor that was required to not just get bronze, but burnished bronze.
And it was a military outpost. So they understood the conquering. They understood the Romans' rule. So the Romans' rule was like a foot on their neck, pretty much. And Jesus is saying, I'm the man with the burnished bronze feet. I'm the man. I am the God. I am the Son of God who sees everything, who knows everything, has all power over everything. This is who I am. This is who this letter is coming from. Listen up. So that's the proclaimer. That's who's proclaiming this message. That's the person who wrote it. And then he goes into this. He says, I know your deeds. When the God of all power and all knowing says, I know your deeds, he knows, right? He knows everything. He knows all the deeds. And, like John said last week, God is one of those, he sandwiches it, gives you a good comment, then tells you the bad comment, and then tells you another good comment. Sandwiches the criticism between two praises. And he starts off by praising this, and this is what a church wants to hear. He says, I know your deeds, I know of your love. If your love has reached up to me, I see it, I know your faith, I know your service, I know your perseverance, I know that you are doing such a great job. It's awesome. The faith, love, service, and perseverance. You love the neighbors. You love each other. God, people, you are doing such a great job on these things. You have faith that everything's going to be working out. Your faith is well known. It's not just something that you said, I have faith, but you proved it. Through what? Through your service. Through serving the community. When I'm hearing these things, I'm thinking of the Foundry Church. And the stuff that and Providence Baptist Church from Harrisburg, North Carolina, who came up and joined us this week, who had a bunch of youth, 29 people came up, and we couldn't find enough stuff for them to do to keep them busy, because they were like, give me more stuff to do. And we had to create jobs for them to do, and they did them. And then if I had one problem, they said, let me send you 4 people to come up and help you out with that. I'm like, okay. We got paint all over the floor in the office. And we painted the office, and we got paint all over the floor in the office. And if anybody knows Joy Kiefer, this is not a good thing. she looked at the floor and she didn't say anything with her voice. But with the rest of her body, she said something. And so the next day I get a can of Oops and I start cleaning the floor myself. And next thing I know, I ran out of Oops because I didn't buy enough. Oops is a paint remover thing. Those of you who don't know what Oops is, it's when you, oops, I made a mistake. Get the paint remover, wipe it off. So I'm on the floor wiping it off, and I get somebody to buy some more, and I hand it to somebody who helped paint the room and helped make the mess and show her what needs to be done. She said, next thing I know, I get 4 other people in the room helping me out.
And if you know the office, 5 people do not fit comfortably in that office.
No. But they did it with joy. They did it with love. They did it with service. They did it with perseverance. They did not stop until they could not find any more paint on the floor or they ran out of Oops. It's a funny phrase to say, yes, I ran out of Oops. I ran out of Oops. But they stuck with their job until it was done. And everything that they did, they stuck with it until it was done. When it got hard, they figured out another way to do it. That's the group of church Thyatira. They loved what people. They had faith that God was going to see them through. They served. They kept moving forward. All these things, I know this isn't going to quench my thirst too badly, but I'm getting kind of thirsty. All these things is what God says, I've seen this. The Son of God says, I see this in your heart, I know your deeds, and I praise you for it. One of the commentators that I've been reading about Revelation says that one thing you can pull out of these 7 letters is that the God of all the universe knows what you're doing and how you live. And he praises you for all good stuff. But then we get to the point, verse 19. I wish we could live in verse 18 or 19 right. I wish we could live in verse 19. You know, just dwell in 19 and just stay there. And just say, wrap ourselves up in the praise of God. But then God says, then the Son of God says this. But I hate buts. This is a big butt. I don't like big butts. I'm not going to lie. But I have this against you. Oh, Lord. It says you tolerate the woman Jezebel. You tolerate the woman Jezebel. Anybody, does the name Jezebel sound familiar to you guys? Okay. Oh man, Jezebel is not a good name, is it? Even if you don't know anything about Jezebel. You know, you sit there in the southern, I see it in one of the good southern ladies I used to know says, look, and one of the biggest insults she can come up with somebody goes, that Jezebel? Mm-hmm. That Jezebel, she just don't know what she's doing. And Jezebel, story of Jezebel in the Book of Kings is she tempted the people of God, and she led the king Ahab into sin and into worshiping other prophets, other gods that really have no power to, really not gods, but other idols. She led them into sexual immorality. She led them into one of the translations that I read, and I really loved that word, and it was fornication. I love when the Bible says words like fornication, because then you can preach about fornication. And they're like, yeah, all right, the Bible's talking about it, so I can preach about fornication. And she led the people of God astray. Not just the king, but the entire nation of Israel. She started leading them astray. And the prophet Elijah stood against her. She got the prophet Elijah who defeated 400 prophets of Baal, who called fire down from heaven to consume the fatted calf for the. I love that story. The story of it's like, whose God is going to burn this sacrifice up first? Your God or our God? My God. And there was 400 prophets of Baal praying and cutting themselves and trying to get their God's attention. And Elijah's sitting there saying, what? Is your God asleep? You might have to yell a little louder, right? I'm not preaching on that story right now, but I'm kind of telling them. And Elijah goes up and he calls and he says, pour water on the thing. They inundate it with, that's my word for the day. They consume it with water, and then he prays. And the fire licks it all up, and the stones are melted, the water's gone. And this Jezebel chick says, I'm going to kill you, Elijah. And Elijah runs like a little girl.
A little girl's running.
Aw.
Oh, God, I forgot what video. So he runs like a little girl and hides in a cave. Because Jezebel, who has turned the hearts of the entire nation of Israel against him and against God. God does not like Jezebel. So this Jezebel that he's mentioning is not really, probably not the name of the woman or the person that's leading them away. But the Son of God says, this woman is just as bad as the Jezebel in Kings. I had to find a name to put to her. I had to choose. God, Jesus and John probably sit there. We have to get a name to put to this woman. What we call her? We call her Barbara? No, we call her Jezebel because everybody knows what that means. And this is what he says. He says, you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed idol. They acts of sexual immorality, of fornication. And it uses the word tolerate. This is where compromise comes in. This is why I started the whole conversation using compromise. Because it starts with this little word, tolerance. Lord, it's going to get me in trouble. I just know it. But we start to tolerate people and their false teachings and their problems. We start to allow these small, subtle, doctrinal wrongnesses. Look at the source later, it's in there.
Incorrigibilities.
That's a good word too. And the Greek, and we start to allow these little things come into our lives. These little things. We start listening to the small voices we should listen to. Jezebels. I like the Greek word used that they translated to tolerate is, well, and the King James uses the word sufferists. Sufferist? I can't pronounce King James word. Suffers. The Greek word is eao. 3 vowels. Eao. Which means to allow, permit. But it also means to give up and let go.